Grandma, listen. They're coming for us. Oh my goodness. No.
Grandma, don't drink that.
She's fine, it's just champagne.
I think you know what you did.
I saw them take it, Grandma.
I know, baby. I saw it too. But don't you worry, I'll handle it. It's gonna be okay. You put something in this, didn't you?
Mama, please.
The letter that changed everything arrived on a Tuesday morning. Across the top in bold red letters were the words, "Second notice." I almost tossed it aside until one sentence made my hands go cold. "We received your previous request to decline participation." I read it 3 times. I had never declined anything. When I called the office, the woman checked my file and calmly confirmed that someone had responded in my name and asked them to close my application. That was when I remembered who had been collecting my mail for almost a year. My daughter, Heather. And suddenly I had only one question. If I never answered that first letter, who did? Before I tell you what I discovered, if you've ever trusted someone you love with something important, please like this video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, would you confront your daughter immediately, or would you quietly investigate first? I'd also love to know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Sometimes it amazes me how far these stories travel, and it reminds me that none of us are as alone as we sometimes feel. 10 months before that second notice arrived, I would have laughed if anyone had suggested my daughter was keeping something from me. Heather was the person I trusted most in the world. After Frank died, trust was something I handed out more freely than I should have, mostly because grief made ordinary things feel impossibly heavy. Frank and I had been married for 42 years. For most of those years, our life wasn't remarkable enough to interest anybody but us. We had a modest 3-bedroom house in Pennsylvania, a maple tree. Frank complained about every autumn and a kitchen table with a burn mark from the Christmas. He tried to make creme brulee with a hardware store torch. I had worked more than 30 years in administration at a community hospital. Frank had spent most of his working life maintaining equipment for a manufacturing company. We weren't wealthy, but we had been careful. Frank used to say, "Rich is owing less than you can afford." By the time we reached our 60s, the mortgage was nearly paid off. We had some savings, and I believed we had done everything responsibly. Then Frank died. It happened faster than either of us expected. One month we were arguing about whether the porch needed repainting. A few weeks later, I was standing in that same kitchen staring at his coffee mug because I couldn't bring myself to move it. Grief does strange things to your confidence. I could still drive. I could still cook. I could balance a checkbook and understand a bank statement. But suddenly, every decision felt dangerous because Frank wasn't sitting across from me to say, "Wilma, you're overthinking it." That was when Heather stepped in. At first, I was grateful. More than grateful. I was relieved. She came by 3 or 4 times a week after work. Sometimes Jason came with her, but usually it was just Heather. She brought groceries. She changed a light bulb over the basement stairs that I couldn't safely reach. She called the insurance company when I couldn't bear to explain for the 5th time that my husband had died. And every afternoon she visited, she stopped at the mailbox before coming inside. "Mail call," she'd announce, walking into the kitchen with a stack of envelopes. It became our routine. She would sit across from me and sort everything into little piles. Electric bill. Junk. Medicare. More junk. Sometimes she would hold up an official-looking envelope and frown. "I'll take care of this one, Mom." I never questioned it. Heather was an office manager at a local insurance company. Forms, deadlines, passwords, account numbers, online portals. Those things were part of her working day. I had spent decades dealing with hospital paperwork myself, but after Frank died, I didn't have the energy for another form asking me to check a box beside widowed. So when Heather said, "Let me handle it," I let her. That sentence became more common over the following months. "Let me handle it, Mom." At first it sounded like love. One Saturday morning, my friend Carol Whitmore came over for coffee. Carol and I had known each other for more than 25 years. She was 70, sharp as a tack, and incapable of pretending to agree with you simply to make you comfortable. She had recently visited a senior living community outside town with her sister. It's not one of those depressing places you're imagining, she told me. They have independent apartments, gardens, activities, transportation, and some of the units are income-based. I immediately shook my head. I'm not ready for that. Carol stirred her coffee. I didn't say you were. I said you should know your options. That was Carol. She believed information was never dangerous. I mentioned the conversation to Heather 2 days later. Her reaction surprised me. Why would you want to leave this house? I didn't say I wanted to. You've lived here 35 years. I know. Dad loved this place. There was something almost defensive in her voice. I remember smiling because I thought I understood. He loved complaining about this place. Heather didn't laugh. Instead, she looked around the kitchen. You don't need some little apartment full of strangers, Mom. You have your home. I told her Carol had mentioned an affordable senior housing program and that I was only curious. Heather immediately softened. Okay, give me the information. I'll look into it. So I did. A week or two later, I asked whether she'd found anything. Heather was standing at my counter opening the mail. Oh, that place. Yes. She barely looked up. I checked. I don't think you'd qualify. Why not? Income guidelines, asset rules. It's complicated. I remember feeling mildly disappointed, but not suspicious. That's too bad. Honestly, Mom, you're better off here anyway. Then she smiled, and I accepted it. That was how easily it happened. No argument, no dramatic confrontation, just a daughter saying she had checked and a mother believing her. As the months passed, Heather gradually handled more of my paperwork. There were envelopes from government offices, insurance statements, retirement documents, notices related to Frank's accounts. I noticed that she sometimes put certain envelopes directly into her handbag. Shouldn't I keep that? I asked once. I need to scan something from it. I'll bring it back. I don't remember whether she did. That fact bothers me now. Not because I should have been suspicious then, but because I had become so accustomed to Heather managing things that I stopped noticing what returned and what didn't. Carol noticed the change before I did. One afternoon, she asked me about a property tax relief program we'd discussed. Heather checked it, I said, and apparently I don't qualify. Carol frowned. Really? That's what Heather said. She looked as if she wanted to say more, but she didn't. At the time, I was almost irritated by her expression. Heather was my daughter, my only child. She had been the one sitting beside me at the funeral home when I couldn't remember which hymns Frank liked. She had helped me write thank you cards. She had slept on my couch the first night after the funeral because I was afraid of waking up alone. How could I possibly look at that woman and imagine anything sinister in her carrying my mail? So I didn't. And Heather kept helping, or at least that's what I called it. There were little moments I would remember differently later. The way she changed the subject whenever I asked about certain applications. The way she sometimes arrived before I expected her and already had my mail in her hand. The way she repeatedly told me not to worry about government paperwork. The way she once asked whether I still used the same email password. I gave it to her. Why wouldn't I? She was my daughter. That is the part people sometimes misunderstand when they hear what happened later. They ask why I didn't protect myself, why I didn't demand to see every document, why I trusted her. But trust doesn't feel dangerous while you're giving it to someone you love. It feels like family. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Heather came over while I was folding laundry. I heard the front door open. Mom. In here. She appeared carrying 2 grocery bags and a bundle of mail. We talked about dinner. We talked about Jason's work. We talked about a doctor's appointment. I had the following week. Nothing unusual. Then Heather sat at the kitchen table and began sorting my mail. She handed me a catalog, a utility bill, a birthday card from my cousin. Then she paused at a large white envelope. I saw an official seal in the corner. What is that? I asked. Probably nothing. She turned it over. For just a second, something changed in her face. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Then it disappeared. I'll check it for you. She slid the envelope underneath 2 others. I went back to putting groceries away. That moment lasted maybe 10 seconds. For months afterward, I didn't think about it. Not once. But after the second notice arrived, and I began reconstructing everything that had happened, that little scene returned with painful clarity. Heather had known what that envelope was, or at least she had known enough not to open it in front of me. That afternoon, she stayed another 20 minutes. Before leaving, she kissed my cheek. "Call me if you need anything." "I will." She picked up her purse. Then she gathered several envelopes from the table. I didn't ask why. I watched my daughter walk through my front door carrying pieces of my life in her handbag. And because I trusted her, I never thought to stop her. Not then. I had no idea that some of those envelopes contained choices I would never be allowed to make. For 3 days after I received that second notice, I said nothing to Heather. I answered her calls the way I always had. When she asked whether I needed groceries, I said no. When she reminded me about my doctor's appointment, I thanked her. When she asked if anything interesting had come in the mail, I felt something tighten in my chest. "No," I said. "Nothing important." It was the first time I could remember deliberately lying to my daughter, but I needed time to think. I kept the second notice inside an old recipe book in my bedroom somewhere. Heather would never have a reason to look. Then I bought a yellow legal pad. I sat at my kitchen table one morning with a cup of coffee and wrote a heading across the top. Things I was told I didn't qualify for. At first I felt ridiculous. Then I started writing. The first thing I remembered was the property tax relief program. Carol had mentioned it months earlier after hearing about it from a woman at church. "You should check," she'd told me. "You're retired now. Frank's gone. Your household income changed." I had mentioned it to Heather. She immediately offered to investigate. A couple of weeks later, I asked what she'd learned. "You're over the limit," she said. That had been the entire conversation. I wrote property tax relief on the first line. The second was energy assistance. That previous winter had been unusually cold, and my heating bills had frightened me. Heather had noticed one sitting on the counter. "There are programs for seniors," she'd said. She took the bill home and said she would look into them. Several weeks later, she told me I wouldn't qualify. "Your income is too high for one program, and I think we missed the deadline for the other." Again, I accepted it. I wrote energy assistance underneath the first item. Then came the senior housing program. That one hurt differently. I had never told Heather that after Carol mentioned the community, I had gone online and looked at photographs. There were small apartments with wide windows, a garden, a community room, transportation to grocery stores and medical appointments. I wasn't desperate to leave my house. But for the first time since Frank died, I had imagined a future that wasn't simply me growing older alone in rooms filled with memories. Heather had said I probably didn't qualify. I wrote senior housing. Then I stopped. There was something else, something involving Frank. Several months after his death, I had received paperwork about a benefit connected to his employment and retirement records. I couldn't remember the exact terminology anymore. Heather had taken those papers. Later, when I asked about them, she'd waved the issue away. "It's not worth pursuing, Mom. You'd probably spend months fighting for almost nothing." At the time, I'd been relieved not to deal with another reminder that my husband was gone. Now I wrote Frank's benefit. 4 items, 4 opportunities, 4 answers delivered through Heather. I stared at the page. Something was wrong. I got up and went to the filing cabinet in the spare bedroom. Frank had always teased me because I saved everything. Bank statements, tax records, insurance notices, warranty papers for appliances we no longer owned. "You'll save the receipt for your own funeral if they give it to you early enough," he'd once joked. That morning I was grateful for my habit. I searched every folder: taxes, utilities, retirement, housing. Nothing. No denial letter. I checked the desk. Nothing. I opened the drawer where I kept important mail. Nothing. By noon, papers covered the spare bed. There wasn't a single official letter telling me I had been denied any of those 4 things. I sat on the edge of the bed. Maybe Heather had gone paperless. Maybe everything had been handled by email. That explanation calmed me for approximately 30 seconds. Then I opened my laptop. I searched my inbox. Tax relief. Nothing. Energy assistance. Nothing. Housing. A few advertisements, but no decision. I searched Frank's name. Still nothing relevant. Then I remembered Heather had access to my email. A cold feeling moved through me. I closed the laptop. That afternoon, Carol came over. I hadn't planned to tell her everything, but the moment she saw the papers covering my kitchen table, she took off her coat and said, "All right, what's happened?" I handed her the second notice. She read it slowly, then she read it again. "What did they tell you on the phone? That someone declined participation? Who?" They couldn't tell me much until they verified some things, but the response was made in my name. Carol sat down. "And you didn't do it?" "No." She looked at me for a long moment. I knew what she was thinking. "Don't say it," I whispered. "I wasn't going to." "Yes, you were." Carol reached across the table. "I'm not accusing Heather of anything." I looked away. Because I was. At least part of me was. And admitting that felt like betraying my own child. I told Carol about the legal pad, about the 4 programs, about searching the filing cabinet and my email. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked me one question. "Wilma, did you actually read any of those denial letters yourself?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Carol waited. "The tax program," she said. "Did you see the rejection?" "No." "The heating assistance?" "No." "The housing application?" I shook my head. "Frank's benefit?" "No." Carol leaned back. "Then how do you know you were denied?" "Because Heather told me." The words sounded different when I said them aloud. Not wrong, just frighteningly incomplete. Carol's expression softened. "That doesn't prove she did anything bad." "I know." "There could be explanations." "I know." "But you need information that doesn't come through Heather." That sentence stayed with me. Information that doesn't come through Heather. I suddenly realized how much of my own life had been filtered through my daughter. What came in the mail, what forms mattered, what programs I qualified for, which deadlines had passed, which opportunities were worth pursuing. Heather hadn't simply been helping me complete paperwork. She had gradually become the person who told me what my choices were, and I had never noticed. That evening, Heather called. "Hey, Mom, how was your day?" "Fine." "You sound tired." "I've been cleaning." "Don't overdo it." There it was. That familiar concern. The same warm voice that had comforted me after Frank died. For a moment, I hated myself for suspecting her. Then Heather asked, "Did you get any mail today?" My hand tightened around the phone. "A few things." "Anything from the housing office?" My heart seemed to stop. She had never asked me that before. Not specifically. I looked across the kitchen at the yellow legal pad. "No," I said quietly. There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 1 second. But I heard it. "Okay," Heather said. "Just checking." We talked for another minute. After we hung up, I remained standing beside the counter with the phone in my hand. I could have called her back. I could have demanded an explanation. Part of me wanted to. But another part of me remembered something Frank used to say whenever emotions threatened to outrun facts. "Don't argue with what you think happened. Find out what happened." So I didn't confront Heather. Instead, I returned to the kitchen table. I turned to a clean page on my legal pad. At the top, I wrote 4 names: property tax relief, energy assistance, senior housing, Frank's benefit. Beside each one, I wrote the phone number of the office responsible. Tomorrow I would start calling. Not Heather. Not anyone speaking for me. Me. And for the first time, I wasn't going to ask my daughter whether I had been rejected. I was going to ask the people who supposedly rejected me. Because by then, one possibility had begun to frighten me more than all the others. What if there had never been any rejection letters at all? The next morning, I woke before 6. For almost a year after Frank died, mornings had been the hardest part of the day. I would wake up, reach toward his side of the bed without thinking, and then remember. But that morning was different. I wasn't thinking about Frank. I was thinking about 4 phone numbers written on a yellow legal pad. By 8:30, I was sitting at the kitchen table with coffee, my social security card, tax records, and every identification document I thought someone might ask for. I stared at the first number. Property tax relief. My finger hovered over the phone. It sounds ridiculous now, but I was nervous. For months, Heather had made these calls for me. Somewhere along the way, I had begun believing official paperwork was too complicated for me. Then I remembered that I'd spent more than 30 years working in hospital administration. I had handled insurance disputes, scheduling problems, billing corrections, and frightened families. I could make a phone call. So I dialed. After navigating an automated menu, I reached a woman named Patricia. I explained that I wanted to check the status of an application submitted several months earlier. She verified my identity. Then I heard her typing. "Yes, Mrs. Langford, I have it." My heart quickened. Was I denied? There was a pause. "No, ma'am." I gripped my pen. "I'm sorry. Your application wasn't denied." I looked at the word Heather had given me months earlier. Ineligible. "Then what happened?" Patricia typed again. "It looks like your application passed the preliminary eligibility review, but the file was closed afterward." "Why?" "The applicant requested withdrawal." I stopped breathing for a second. "The applicant?" "Yes, ma'am." Meaning me. According to the file. I pressed my palm against the table. "I never requested that." Patricia's tone changed immediately. She became more careful. "I understand. I can give you instructions for requesting a review of the record." I wrote down everything she said. Before hanging up, I asked one final question. "Was I over the income limit?" "No, Mrs. Langford. That's not why this file was closed." When the call ended, I sat silently. One lie, misunderstanding, mistake, whatever it was. I wasn't ready to call it deliberate. Not yet. I drew a line through the word ineligible. Underneath I wrote, "Applicant requested withdrawal." My hand was shaking. The second call was to the Energy Assistance Program. This time I didn't ask whether I qualified. I asked exactly what had happened to my previous application. The representative put me on hold. I listened to cheerful instrumental music while my stomach twisted. When she returned, she told me the application had been started, but later marked as no longer being pursued. "Was it because I missed the deadline?" I asked. "No. The record indicates we received notice that you did not wish to continue." There it was again. I thanked her. Then I hung up. 2. I stood and walked to the kitchen window. Outside, a delivery truck rolled down the street. Across the road, my neighbor was pulling weeds from her flower bed. Everything looked painfully ordinary. Inside my house, the world I understood was beginning to come apart. Maybe Heather had misunderstood me. Maybe I had said something after Frank's death and forgotten it. I desperately wanted an innocent explanation. But 2 separate offices had records showing that I had chosen to stop applications I remembered wanting. I returned to the table. The third number belonged to the senior housing office. That was the call I feared most. A woman answered. "Good morning, this is Denise Caldwell." I introduced myself. There was a brief pause. "Mrs. Langford." "Yes, I believe we've spoken recently." She was the woman who had discussed the second notice with me. I explained that I was trying to understand my original application. Denise verified my information and pulled up the record. "I can see why you're concerned," she said. "What exactly happened?" "Your application entered preliminary review. We requested additional documentation. After that, we received a response indicating you wished to decline further participation." "How did you receive it?" "Let me check." I heard her keyboard. "It appears the response came electronically." "Email." "Yes." My stomach dropped. "Can you tell me what it said?" Denise hesitated. "I can summarize the communication." "Please." Another pause. "The message stated that you had reconsidered your housing plans intended to remain in your current residence and did not want your application processed further." I closed my eyes. Those words were too specific. I had never written them. Was it written as if it came from me? Yes. Did it say, "My daughter thinks I should stay," or anything like that? No, it was written in the first person. My throat tightened. I didn't send it. Denise became very quiet. Then she asked, Mrs. Langford, did you authorize anyone to communicate on your behalf? My daughter helped me with paperwork. Do you have a power of attorney? No. Did you give her authority to make housing decisions for you? No. The answer came faster this time. She was helping me, that's all. Denise chose her next words carefully. Helping with correspondence and having authority to make decisions are not necessarily the same thing. That sentence struck me harder than I expected, because until then I had blurred those two things myself. Heather helped, therefore Heather decided. Heather knew paperwork, therefore Heather knew what was best. Heather was my daughter, therefore Heather could be trusted with anything. But those weren't the same statements. Can I see the email? I asked. You can request a copy of your complete file. I want everything, Denise explained the procedure. I wrote every instruction down. Then I asked, can you tell what email address sent the withdrawal? There was another pause. I would prefer to include that information in the records we provide you. My heartbeat quickened. Why? Because I don't want to give you incomplete information over the phone. That answer frightened me more than if she'd simply said Heather's name. I thanked her and ended the call. 3 offices, 3 applications. None had rejected me for the reasons Heather gave. I looked at the 4th item, Frank's benefit. I didn't call. Not that day. I had learned enough. Around noon, Heather texted me. Need anything from the store? I stared at the message. For the first time in my life, seeing my daughter's name made me nervous. I typed no thank you. I'm fine. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared. A moment later. Did you call that housing office again? My chest tightened. I didn't answer immediately. Why was she asking? How much did she know? Finally, I wrote, just sorting through some things. Heather responded almost immediately. Mom, don't stress yourself out over paperwork. I'll come by tonight and help. I read the message twice. A week earlier, it would have comforted me. Now it felt different. I'll handle it. I'll check. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of everything. I suddenly understood how often those phrases had been used to close conversations. I replied, not tonight. I'm tired, Heather called. I let it ring. That may sound like a small act. For me, it wasn't. I had always answered Heather. After the ringing stopped, I gathered my papers and placed them in a folder. Then I carried the folder upstairs and hid it beneath a stack of old photo albums in my bedroom closet. I felt foolish doing it. This was my home. Those were my documents. Heather was my daughter. Why was I hiding my own paperwork from my own child because I no longer knew what she would do if she saw it? That realization nearly broke me. Later that afternoon, Denise called back. Mrs. Langford, I wanted to confirm that your records request has been submitted. Thank you. It may take a little time to assemble everything. That's fine. She hesitated. There is something else I want you to understand. I sat straighter. What? If you did not send that withdrawal communication, you should carefully review the contact information and authorization documents in your file. Authorization documents. Yes. My fingers tightened around the phone. I don't remember signing anything giving someone permission to decline housing for me. I'm not saying that you did. I'm saying you should review everything. I looked toward the hallway, half expecting Heather to walk through the door. Denise, do you think someone pretended to be me? I can't make that determination. But it's possible. Another careful pause. If a communication was submitted as though it came from you, and you did not submit or authorize it, then yes, that's something you should take seriously. After we hung up, I returned to the kitchen table. I crossed out 3 things Heather had told me. Ineligible, missed deadline, housing denied. Under each one I wrote the truth. Withdrawn, stopped, declined by applicant, by me, at least according to the records. That evening, Heather called. This time I answered. Hey, Mom. Her voice sounded completely normal. Hi, sweetheart. Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine. I can come over tomorrow. Maybe. Another pause. Then she asked casually, did anything unusual come in the mail? I looked at the hidden second notice. No. I hated how easily the lie came out. Okay, she said. Love you. I love you too. And I did. That was what made everything so painful. After the call, I sat alone at the kitchen table where Frank and I had eaten thousands of meals together. I wished desperately that he were there. I wanted him to tell me I was imagining things. Instead, all I had were 3 government records and a daughter suddenly very interested in my mailbox. The next morning, I received confirmation that the housing office was preparing my complete file. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of being rejected. I was afraid of what those papers might prove, because somewhere inside that file was the answer to a question I no longer wanted to ask. Who had been making decisions in my name, and when the records arrived, I would finally see exactly whose hands had been on my life. The envelope from the housing office arrived 6 days later. I knew what it was before I opened the mailbox. It was thick white and addressed directly to me, Wilma Langford. For a few seconds, I simply stood at the curb holding it. My name had never looked so important. I carried the envelope inside, locked the front door, and set it on the kitchen table. Then I called Carol. The records came. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. No. There was silence. "Wilma, I need to look at them alone first." Carol understood. "Call me when you're ready." I made coffee I never drank and opened the envelope. There were copies of my original application follow-up notices, internal processing notes, contact records, and printed copies of electronic communications. I began at the first page. Name Wilma Langford. Date of birth correct. Address correct. Phone number mine. Email address mine. Nothing unusual. Then I turned several pages. There was a notation showing that my contact information had been updated approximately 3 weeks after the application was submitted. I read the new email address. My stomach dropped. It belonged to Heather. I recognized it immediately. Her work email. I checked the next page. Secondary phone number. Heather's cell. I leaned back in my chair. For several minutes I didn't touch anything. I tried to imagine an innocent explanation. Maybe I'd asked Heather to add herself as a contact. Maybe Denise's office required a secondary contact. Maybe Heather had simply wanted to make sure I didn't miss something. Those explanations were possible. I wanted them to be true. Then I found the authorization form. It had my name at the top. Below it was Heather's full name, Heather Langford Parker. The language stated that she could assist with correspondence related to my application. Assist with correspondence. I read that phrase again. It didn't say she could decide where I lived. It didn't say she could withdraw my application. It didn't say she could decline anything. At the bottom was a signature, Wilma Langford. I stared at it. It looked like mine. Almost. The W was close. The L leaned the way mine usually did, but something about it bothered me. My signature had become less elegant as I'd gotten older. Frank used to tease me that it looked like a cardiogram after the first 3 letters. This signature was smoother, careful, almost as though someone had practiced it. I pulled my checkbook from my purse and compared the signatures. Not identical, but close enough that I couldn't say with certainty it wasn't mine. Then a memory returned. It was 2 weeks after Frank's funeral. Heather had come over carrying a folder. I had barely slept. There were sympathy cards everywhere. Flowers were dying in vases. I hadn't even put away Frank's shoes. Heather sat beside me at the kitchen table. "There are a few things we need to straighten out, Mom. Insurance, bank paperwork, medical bills, account changes." I remembered pages being turned. Sign here, then another, and here. At one point, I had asked what something was. Heather squeezed my shoulder. "Just authorization so I can help with paperwork. You don't need to worry about this right now." So I signed. How many pages I couldn't remember. Was the housing authorization among them I didn't know? That uncertainty was almost worse than finding a forged signature, because it meant Heather might not have needed to forge anything. She may have obtained my signature when I was too broken to understand how it could later be used. I kept reading. There were notes showing that several communications had been sent electronically. Not to me, to Heather. Requests for documents, updates, a notice explaining the next stage of review. All of them had gone to an email address I never checked because it wasn't mine. Then I reached the withdrawal. A printed copy of the email sat near the back of the packet. I read it slowly. It said that after reconsidering my circumstances, I had decided to remain in my current home and no longer wished to pursue placement through the program. It thanked the office for its time. It was polite, clear, final, and completely false. I never wrote those words. I never asked anyone else to write them. But whoever sent that message knew exactly what decision would close the door. Remain in my current home. I felt suddenly sick. I called Carol. This time I didn't say anything when she answered. Wilma. Her email address is on my application. Carol was quiet. I'm coming over. 25 minutes later, she was sitting beside me. I showed her everything. She didn't rush. That was one thing I loved about Carol. She could be blunt, but she didn't jump ahead of facts. She examined the contact change, the authorization, the withdrawal email. Finally, she looked at me. Did you send this? No. Did you ask Heather to? No. Did you tell Heather you wanted to stop the application? No. My voice broke on the last answer. Carol reached for my hand. I don't understand why she'd do this. We don't know why yet. She's my daughter. I know. She sat beside me at Frank's funeral. I know. She slept on my couch because I couldn't stand being alone. Carol squeezed my fingers. Both things can be true, Wilma. I looked at her. What things? Someone can love you and still do something terribly wrong to you. That was harder to hear than an accusation. Because I knew she was right. I had wanted two simple possibilities. Either Heather loved me and was innocent, or she had betrayed me and therefore everything between us had been false. But families aren't that simple. Love doesn't always prevent selfishness. Sometimes it gives selfishness somewhere to hide. After Carol left, I searched my email again. This time I wasn't looking for rejection letters. I was looking for evidence that my contact information had been changed. I found an old security notification buried among hundreds of messages. A new sign-in, months earlier. I remembered calling Heather because I couldn't access an insurance portal. She had asked for my email password. I'd given it to her without hesitation. Another memory. Heather sitting at my kitchen counter. Do you still use the same password? Yes. You should probably change that someday, Mom. We'd laughed. Now I wasn't laughing. I went back to the housing packet and examined the dates. The contact information had changed shortly after Heather began handling more of my paperwork. The withdrawal came weeks later. This wasn't one envelope disappearing. A system had been created where information intended for me could reach someone else first. I felt violated in a way I couldn't explain. Nobody had stolen jewelry. Nobody had emptied my bank account. Nobody had broken into my house. Instead, someone had quietly stepped between me and my own choices. And because that person was my daughter, I'd opened the door myself. That evening, Heather called. Hey, Mom, what are you doing? I looked at the housing records spread across my bed upstairs. Just reading. Anything interesting? Actually, yes. There was a pause. What? I nearly told her. I nearly said, why is your email address on my housing application? But Frank's old advice came back. Find out what happened. So I swallowed the question. An old novel. Heather laughed. You scared me for a second. Scared her. Two ordinary words. But something inside me went still. Why would I scare you? Oh, you know what I mean. No, I don't. Another pause. Then she changed the subject. Jason and I might come over Sunday. That's fine. After we hung up, I returned to the records. Until that moment, I'd been asking myself one question. Did Heather interfere with my applications? Now I was beginning to believe I knew the answer. But another question had taken its place. Why the property tax relief would have saved me money. The energy assistance would have helped me. The benefit connected to Frank might have helped me. And senior housing would have given me another option for my future. Why would my own daughter want to stop things that could make my life easier? I walked downstairs and stood in the kitchen. Through the doorway, I could see the living room Frank and I had painted ourselves, the old fireplace, the staircase, the family photographs, the house we'd spent decades paying for. Then I remembered something Heather had said when I first mentioned senior housing. Why would you want to leave this house? At the time, I'd heard concern. Now, for the first time, I heard something else. I went to the filing cabinet and pulled out the folder marked House. Inside were mortgage statements, insurance records, and a copy of the deed. I carried everything to the kitchen table. Then I remembered the questions Heather had asked me over the past year. How much was left on the mortgage? Was Frank's name still on the deed? Had I changed my will? Would I ever consider selling one by one? Those questions came back. I sat there until after midnight. The house was almost paid off, and property values in our neighborhood had risen dramatically. For the first time, I stopped asking why Heather wanted to manage my paperwork. I started asking a much more frightening question. Why did my daughter need me to stay in this house? The question stayed with me all night. Why did Heather need me to stay, not want me to stay, need me to stay? There was a difference, and once I heard it in my own mind, I couldn't ignore it. The next morning, I spread the house documents across my kitchen table. The mortgage balance was small. Frank and I had spent decades making payments, sometimes sacrificing vacations and replacing cars later than we should have because he hated debt. This house is our safety net, he used to say. I had always understood that to mean our safety. Now I wondered whether Heather had given those words a different meaning. Carol arrived around 10. I hadn't told her why I wanted her to come. When she walked into the kitchen and saw the deed, mortgage statement, tax assessment, and a notebook on the table, she raised an eyebrow. You planning to become a real estate agent? Sit down. She did. I told her what I'd been thinking. The housing application is the part that doesn't make sense, I said. If Heather wanted to help me financially, why stop me from getting tax relief? Why stop energy assistance? But the housing application is different. Because you'd move. Exactly. Carol looked around the kitchen. And what happens to this place if you move? I could keep it. You could. Or rent it. You could. Or sell it. Carol didn't answer. She didn't have to. I looked down at the mortgage statement. If I sold it, Heather wouldn't control what happened to the money. Carol leaned forward. Has Heather ever told you not to sell more times than I can count? I began remembering those conversations. The first had happened only a few months after Frank died. I had been complaining about the stairs. My knees weren't terrible, but carrying laundry from the basement had become annoying. I don't need this much house anymore, I'd said. Heather immediately responded, Don't talk like that. Like what? Like you're going to sell. I laughed. I didn't say I was selling tomorrow. Dad worked his whole life for this house. At the time, I thought she was grieving. So was I. Frank had repaired almost everything himself. The back deck, the kitchen cabinets, the shelves in the garage. His fingerprints seemed to exist in every room. I understood why Heather felt sentimental, but there had been other conversations. One Sunday, Jason had been helping me move boxes in the basement when Heather called downstairs. Mom, how much do you still owe on the mortgage? I remember looking at her. Why? I'm just curious. Not much. Like 10,020. I laughed. Are you my banker now? She smiled and changed the subject. Another time she asked whether Frank's name was still on the deed. Then came questions about my will. Have you updated it since Dad died? Not yet. You probably should. I know. Everything still comes to me eventually, right? She had said it with a little laugh. I had answered without thinking. Who else would I leave it to? Heather was my only child. At the time, the question seemed almost practical. Sitting across from Carol, it didn't feel practical anymore. It felt like inventory. Carol listened as I reconstructed each conversation. Finally, she asked, Has Heather ever asked what you'd do with the money if you sold? I froze. Yes. When? After you told me about the senior apartments. The memory returned clearly. Heather and I had been standing near the sink. I had joked that if I ever moved somewhere smaller, I'd finally be free from paying someone to clean the gutters. Heather didn't laugh. She asked, Would you have to sell this place to pay for the apartment? I told her I didn't know. Then she said, Because it would be awful to burn through Dad's house just paying rent somewhere. Burn through Dad's house. I'd forgotten those exact words until that moment. Carol's expression hardened. Your house isn't something you're burning through. I know. It's an asset you and Frank earned. I know. And if you need it to take care of yourself, that's what it's for. I know, Carol. My voice came out sharper than I intended. She stopped. I pressed my fingers against my forehead. I'm sorry. You don't have to apologize. I feel stupid. Don't. But I do. I looked around the room. Every question sounds obvious now. No, it sounds obvious now because you're looking backward with new information. That helped. A little. After Carol left, I decided to find out what the house was actually worth. I didn't call a real estate agent. I wasn't ready for Heather to hear through somebody that I was considering anything. Instead, I looked at recent sales in the neighborhood and checked online estimates. The numbers startled me. Homes similar to mine had sold for far more than Frank and I ever imagined when we bought the place. Even after selling costs and the small remaining mortgage, I could potentially walk away with a substantial amount of money. Enough to make my retirement more comfortable. Enough to give me options. And someday, if there was money left enough to become a meaningful inheritance. I stared at that word, inheritance. For most of my life, I'd thought of inheritance as something that existed after death. Now I began wondering whether Heather had started thinking about hers while I was still very much alive. That afternoon, she came by unexpectedly. I barely had time to close the browser window before I heard her key in the front door. Mom, in the kitchen. She entered carrying 2 bags of groceries. You didn't answer my text. I was busy. Doing what? The question was ordinary. Yet suddenly I noticed how often Heather expected an explanation. Reading. She put the groceries down. Reading what? I looked at her. Heather smiled. What? Nothing. She began unpacking the bags. For the first time, I watched her differently. Not as an enemy. I wasn't ready for that. But as another adult whose intentions I no longer automatically understood. She opened the refrigerator. You need milk. I can buy milk. I know. Then why do you always check? She turned around. Because I'm helping you. There it was again. Helping. I'm still capable of buying groceries. Heather looked hurt. I never said you weren't. The old Wilma would have immediately apologized. Instead, I let the silence remain. Heather closed the refrigerator. What's going on with you lately? Nothing. You're acting strange. I'm thinking about some things. What things? My future. Her face changed, only slightly. What about it? I've been wondering whether this house is too much for me. Heather's shoulders stiffened. Mom, we've talked about this. I know. You're fine here. For now. So why create a problem that doesn't exist? I didn't say there was a problem. Then why are we discussing selling the house again? I hadn't said selling. Heather had. I noticed that immediately. I said the house might be too much. She looked at me for several seconds. Then her tone softened. Dad loved this house. I loved your father. That's not the same thing as loving every piece of property he touched. That's not what I mean. What do you mean? Heather looked away. This is our family home. Our, not my, our. Something inside me went cold. I decided to push once more. What if I wanted to sell it? Her head snapped back toward me. Why would you do that? Maybe I'd rather have something smaller. You don't need the money. You don't know what I need. I know enough. The words came too quickly. Heather immediately softened them. I mean, I know you're comfortable. I watched her carefully. Then I asked, would it bother you if I sold? Heather picked up an empty grocery bag and folded it. I just think you'd regret it. That wasn't my question. She didn't answer. Instead, she kissed my cheek and said she had to get home. At the front door, she turned around. Promise me you won't do anything without talking to me. There was a time when that sentence would have sounded loving. Now it sounded like permission I was expected to request. I'll think about it, I said. Heather stared at me. It was probably the first time I hadn't simply promised. After she left, I locked the door and stood in the hallway. I looked at the photographs on the wall. Heather at 8 years old missing her front teeth. Heather at high school graduation. Heather on her wedding day beside Jason. Frank holding our daughter when she brought her first Christmas present home from kindergarten. This house contained our history. But history wasn't ownership, and memory wasn't a deed. That evening I pulled out my will. Heather was indeed the primary beneficiary. There was nothing surprising about that. She was my only child. But as I read the document, something became painfully clear. Heather would inherit what remained after I died. Not before. Not while I still needed it. Not while I still had decisions to make. I placed the will beside the housing records. Then I wrote one question on my yellow legal pad. Why does Heather care so much about the house? I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew where I needed to look next. Because if Heather had risked my trust to keep me from leaving sentiment alone didn't explain it. There had to be something more, something urgent enough to make my daughter believe my future needed to be controlled. And for the first time I wondered whether the problem wasn't my finances at all. Maybe it was hers. Once I began wondering about Heather's finances memories I had dismissed as ordinary, started rearranging themselves. Jason had always worked in real estate. Not as an agent exactly. He bought older properties with partners, renovated them, and either rented or resold them. Some years were good, some weren't. Frank had never trusted the business. Too much money borrowed against tomorrow, he once told me. I had defended Jason. He's doing well, Frank had shrugged. Doing well and looking like you're doing well aren't always the same thing. At the time I thought he was being old-fashioned. Now I remembered those words. Heather and Jason still drove nice cars. Their house looked beautiful whenever I visited. Heather wore good clothes to work. Nothing about them suggested financial trouble. But over the previous year, small things had changed. They stopped talking about vacations. Jason sold his truck and said he wanted something more practical. Heather once complained that their mortgage payment had become difficult after another expense increased. Then there was the project. A year before Frank died, Jason and two partners had purchased an older building they planned to renovate into several rental units. At Thanksgiving, Jason had talked about it for nearly an hour. This one could change everything, he'd said. Frank asked one question. How much of your own money is tied up in it? Jason's smile tightened. That's how investing works, Frank. Frank didn't respond. Months later, nobody talked about the project anymore. I didn't want to snoop into my daughter's private finances, and I wasn't going to access anything that wasn't mine. But I started listening more carefully. The first real clue came accidentally. Heather had invited me to dinner on Sunday. I almost declined. Then I thought about something Carol had said. You don't need to interrogate anybody. Just stop ignoring what people tell you. So I went. Dinner was pleasant enough. Jason grilled chicken. Heather made potatoes. We talked about neighborhood gossip and a television show Heather liked. Then Jason's phone rang. He looked at the screen and stood. I need to take this. He went into the living room. A few seconds later, his voice rose. I told you we're working on it. Heather stopped eating. Jason continued quieter now, but I could still hear pieces. Can't come up with that immediately. Another 30 days. The property didn't sell. Heather pushed food around her plate. I looked at her. Everything okay? Business. Sounds stressful. It is. Jason returned several minutes later. His face was flushed. Sorry about that. Nobody mentioned the call again. After dinner, Heather went upstairs to find a sweater she wanted to give me. Jason and I were alone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to trap him. I simply asked, how's that renovation project going? He looked surprised. What project? The building you bought with those partners. His face changed. Oh, that. Did you finish it? Not exactly. What happened? He opened the refrigerator, though he didn't take anything out. Costs went up. One partner pulled out. Financing got ugly. I'm sorry. Yeah. Then he gave a humorless laugh. Real estate isn't quite as forgiving as it looked a few years ago. Heather returned before I could say more. She must have heard part of the conversation because she immediately said, Jason doesn't need to talk about work tonight. Her tone was sharper than necessary. I changed the subject, but driving home I kept thinking about that phone call. The property didn't sell. Another 30 days. Can't come up with that immediately. It didn't prove anything about Heather's actions toward me, but it explained something I hadn't understood before. Pressure. 2 days later, Carol came over. I told her what I'd heard. Debt doesn't mean Heather interfered with your applications because of the house, she said. I know. But it gives you a reason to keep asking questions. I know. Then another memory surfaced. Several months earlier, Heather and Jason had visited me for dinner. I had gone into the pantry for coffee and overheard them speaking quietly. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now the words returned. Jason had said, "We can't count on that." Heather replied, "I'm not saying tomorrow. I'm saying eventually." Then Jason said something I couldn't hear. Heather's answer had been clearer. "Mom's house will eventually solve this." I felt my stomach turn. I told Carol. She stared at me. "You're sure that's what she said?" "Yes." "What did you think she meant at the time?" "I thought maybe they were discussing helping me sell someday." Even as I said it, I heard how weak the explanation sounded. Carol didn't criticize me. She simply asked, "What does it mean to you now?" I looked toward the living room. It means Heather had already put my house into their future. That realization hurt in a way the paperwork hadn't. Paperwork was cold. This was personal. Heather wasn't waiting for a stranger's property. She was waiting for something Frank and I had spent most of our marriage earning. Something I still lived in. Something I still owned. And somehow in her mind, it had already begun becoming hers. I thought about the senior housing application again. If I moved, I might sell. If I sold, the house would become cash. And if that money paid for my retirement, medical needs, travel, or simply a comfortable life, there might be far less left someday. Maybe nothing. For the first time, Heather's actions followed a terrible kind of logic. Keep Mom in the house, protect the property, protect the future inheritance. I wanted to believe that wasn't what she'd done. But then I remembered another conversation. Heather had once asked whether I had considered a home equity loan. I told her absolutely not. Frank hated borrowing against the house. Heather laughed and said, "Well, someday it might make sense if the family needed it." The family. That word again. I had thought she meant me. Maybe she hadn't. That Friday, Heather came over after work. She looked tired. For a moment, seeing her standing in my kitchen almost erased everything. She was still my little girl in some corner of my heart. I remembered braiding her hair before school, teaching her to drive, holding her when her first serious boyfriend broke her heart. Love doesn't disappear simply because trust cracks. Sometimes that makes betrayal harder. Heather poured herself coffee. "Jason's having a rough month." "I'm sorry. That project turned into a nightmare." "Is that why he's getting calls about money?" She looked up sharply. "You heard that. It wasn't exactly quiet." Heather sighed. "They owe people, banks, contractors. It's complicated." "Are you in trouble?" "We'll handle it." "How much, Mom?" "I'm asking because I'm worried." She stared into her coffee. "We're not losing the house tomorrow, if that's what you mean." I hadn't meant that. The fact that she did frightened me. Then Heather looked around my kitchen. "You know we're lucky Dad was so careful." I said nothing. This place is practically paid off. There it was. Not even 5 minutes after discussing her own financial problems. I felt suddenly calm. "Yes," I said. "He always believed in keeping something solid." "He did." Heather smiled faintly. "At least we'll always have that." "Will." I looked directly at her. "Who is we?" Her smile vanished. "What? You said we'll always have that." "I meant the family." "But the house belongs to me." Heather blinked. "Of course it does. While I'm alive." "Mom, what is this?" "Nothing." She studied me, suspicious now. I smiled and changed the subject. For once, Heather was the one who didn't know what I was thinking. After she left, I sat in Frank's old chair. I finally understood something. Maybe Heather hadn't started with a plan to hurt me. Maybe she'd started scared. Scared about Jason's failed investment, scared about debt, scared about losing the life they'd built. Then she'd looked at my nearly paid-off house and seen security. My security. But slowly she had begun treating it as hers. That didn't excuse what she'd done. It made it worse in another way. Because Heather had convinced herself that protecting her future gave her the right to limit mine. I went upstairs and took the housing records from their hiding place. I placed them beside my legal pad. Then I wrote, "Do not confront her yet." Underneath, "Fix everything first." That was the moment my fear began turning into resolve. Heather still believed I needed her to manage my paperwork. She still believed she knew which opportunities I would pursue. She still believed my future could be quietly narrowed until it fit the future she wanted. I wasn't going to argue with her. Not yet. I was going to do something she clearly hadn't expected. I was going to take my own life back before she realized I'd discovered it was missing. And the next morning I began with the one thing Heather had been controlling from the beginning: my mail. The next morning I drove to the post office before I could talk myself out of it. It felt strangely secretive. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I was a 67-year-old woman opening a post office box in my own name with my own identification. Still, as I walked through those glass doors, I felt like I was planning an escape. The clerk handed me a form. "How long would you like the box?" 6 months. Then I changed my mind. "A year." She smiled. "A year it is." When she placed the small key in my hand, I stared at it longer than necessary. It was just a key. But it was the first thing I'd taken back. From that point forward, anything important could be sent somewhere. Heather couldn't reach before I did. I drove home feeling lighter. Then I changed my email password. That was harder than it should have been because Heather had helped me set up several accounts. I spent nearly 2 hours going through security settings, recovery addresses, and phone numbers. I removed Heather's email wherever I found it. I changed my recovery phone number back to mine. I enabled two-step verification. Then I logged out of every device I didn't recognize. The screen asked, "Sign out of all other sessions." I stared at the question. "Yes," I whispered. I clicked it. Something about that tiny action made my eyes fill with tears. For months I had thought reclaiming independence would require some dramatic confrontation. Instead, it began with passwords. Carol called around lunchtime. "How's the revolution going?" I laughed for the first time in days. "I have a P.O. box." "Look at you." "And a new password." "Don't tell me what it is." "I wasn't going to." "Good, you're learning." After we hung up, I took out my yellow legal pad. 4 items remained: property tax relief, energy assistance, senior housing, Frank's benefit. I started with the property tax program. I explained that I had never authorized the withdrawal and wanted to know whether I could reapply. The representative gave me instructions and told me which documents I needed. Income statements, property information, identification, proof of residency. Nothing impossible, nothing beyond my ability. That realization irritated me almost as much as it encouraged me. Heather had made the process sound like a maze I couldn't navigate. It wasn't. It was paperwork. I'd spent half my adult life doing paperwork. I completed the application myself. When I reached the signature line, I paused. Then I signed slowly. Wilma Langford. My name. My decision. The energy assistance application came next. That one required additional information, but I called the office when I had questions. A patient woman walked me through the confusing sections. Nobody laughed at me. Nobody told me I was too old to understand. Nobody said I needed my daughter. By late afternoon, I had completed most of it. The following day, I called about Frank's benefit. That conversation was emotionally harder. Hearing his social security number read back to me brought memories I wasn't prepared for. But this time, I stayed on the phone. The representative explained that the previous inquiry had never been completed and that I could request a review based on Frank's employment and retirement records. "Is it worth pursuing?" I asked. "I can't promise an outcome, Mrs. Langford, but based on what I'm seeing, yes, I would recommend completing the review." I closed my eyes. Heather had told me the opposite. Not worth pursuing. Another decision made before I had been allowed to understand it. Please send everything to my new mailing address. I gave her the P.O. box. Then came the application that mattered most. Senior housing. I called Denise. It's Wilma Langford. I remember you. I want to reapply. There was a pause. Then Denise said, I'm glad you called. Those 4 words nearly broke me. I told her I had changed my contact information and wanted Heather removed from all communications. Denise walked me through the process carefully. We'll note that all decisions must be confirmed directly with you. Good. And we'll use only the contact information you're providing now. Thank you. She explained that because my earlier withdrawal was disputed, the office could review the history rather than treating everything as though I were simply beginning from zero. That wasn't a promise, but it was hope. I filled out a new application. This time I read every line. Name: Wilma Langford. Current residence: my house. Preferred contact: my phone. Email: my email. Authorized representative. I stopped. The line was blank. For a moment I thought about Carol. She would have helped if I'd asked. Then I left it blank. I didn't need anyone authorized to speak for me. Not now. At the bottom was a question asking whether I understood that the information provided was accurate to the best of my knowledge. I checked yes. Then I signed. The next morning I drove back to the post office. I stood in the lobby with 3 envelopes in my hand. A younger version of me would have found the scene ridiculous. But grief and dependence had changed my relationship with ordinary things. Mail had become something that happened around me. Heather collected it. Heather sorted it. Heather explained it. Heather answered it. Now I was there, deciding what left my hands and where it went. I dropped the first envelope into the slot, then the second, then the third. When the last one disappeared, I felt something in my chest loosen. I hadn't won anything yet. I could still be denied. Some deadlines might have passed. Some decisions might be impossible to reverse. But if the answer was no, this time at least it would be an answer given to me. That mattered. Over the next several days, Heather noticed changes. There's hardly any mail here anymore, she said one afternoon. I moved some things online. Since when? Recently. She frowned. I can still help you with that. I know. Do you need me to check your email? No. Her eyes lifted to mine. You changed your password. Yes. Why, security. I told you I could help with security. I'm handling it. Heather stared at me. I could see the questions forming. But she couldn't ask the one she really wanted to ask without revealing too much. Why don't I have access anymore? Instead, she said, you've been acting different. Maybe I am different. Mom, if this is because I said something about the house, it isn't. That was partly true. This wasn't about one comment. It was about a pattern. Heather sighed. I just don't want you making complicated decisions because you're upset. There it was again. The assumption beneath everything. If I disagreed with her, I must be confused, emotional grieving, or overwhelmed, never simply independent. I looked at my daughter. I'm 67, Heather. I know how old you are. Then remember, I've been an adult longer than you've been alive. Her face tightened. I never said you weren't capable. You don't have to say it. Heather picked up her purse. I don't know what's gotten into you. I almost answered. Instead, I smiled. Maybe myself. She left without kissing me goodbye. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But after the door closed, I didn't chase her. I went upstairs and opened the folder containing copies of every new application. At the top, I placed the receipt for my P.O. box. Then I wrote the date on my legal pad. Underneath, I added 3 words. I reapplied today. For the first time since Frank died, my future felt uncertain in a way that didn't frighten me. Because uncertainty meant possibility. Maybe the senior community would accept me. Maybe it wouldn't. Maybe the tax relief would be approved. Maybe the benefit connected to Frank would amount to very little. But those outcomes belonged to me now. Heather could no longer decide which doors I was allowed to knock on. 2 weeks passed. Then on a Monday morning, I drove to the post office and opened my little box. There were 4 envelopes inside. One carried the seal of the property tax program. One came from the Energy Assistance Office. One concerned Frank's records. And the thickest envelope came from Denise's housing office. I stood there staring at them. For months I had been told what other people had supposedly decided about me. This time I would read the answers myself. I opened the first envelope, and when I saw the word at the top of the page, I had to grip the counter to steady myself. Approved, the required review. There was an available 1-bedroom unit in the senior community Carol had first mentioned. Because of my eligibility and the correction made to my earlier file, I could move forward. For a moment I couldn't speak. Mrs. Langford. I'm here. Then Denise said the words I had stopped expecting anyone to say. Congratulations, Mrs. Langford. I pressed my hand against my mouth. I'd been told no so many times without ever hearing the no myself. Now I was hearing yes directly. When would I have to decide? You'll receive the formal documents, but you have time to review everything. Thank you. After the call, I cried. Not because I desperately wanted that apartment. I still hadn't decided whether I would move. I cried because someone had tried to take the choice away from me, and I had gotten it back. That afternoon, Carol brought over a small grocery store cake. Across the top, she'd asked the bakery to write, "Congratulations, Wilma." "You're ridiculous," I told her. "I'm celebrating. I haven't moved anywhere." "That's not what we're celebrating." She was right. We were celebrating the return of a choice. I made one practical mistake during those weeks. When I updated my mailing information with Denise, most future correspondence was directed to my P.O. box. But one formal approval packet had already entered their processing system with my home address attached. Neither Denise nor I realized it in time. The packet arrived on a Tuesday. I wasn't home. Heather was. She had stopped by after work to leave groceries. I know what happened because I reconstructed it later. She parked in my driveway. She walked to the mailbox as she'd done hundreds of times. And there, among advertisements and a utility statement, was a large envelope from the senior housing office. This time she couldn't quietly make it disappear. Not without knowing whether I already expected it. When I returned from the pharmacy, Heather's car was still outside. I walked into the house. She was standing in my kitchen. No groceries had been unpacked. No coffee was brewing. She was simply standing beside the table, holding an envelope. My envelope. The approval packet. "Hi," I said. Heather didn't answer. Her face looked pale. She lifted the envelope slightly. "What is this?" I set my purse down. "You can read." "Why is the senior housing office sending you something?" My heart was pounding, but my voice remained calm. "Because I've been talking to them." Heather stared at me. "Since when?" "For a while." "You told me you weren't getting anything from them." "I told you I hadn't received anything important in the mail." "You lied to me." The accusation almost made me laugh. Instead, I looked at the envelope in her hand. "Is it open?" Heather glanced down. "No." "Good." I walked toward her. "Then give it to me." She didn't. "Mom, did you reapply?" "Give me my mail, Heather." Her fingers tightened around the envelope. "Did you?" I held out my hand. Several seconds passed. Finally, she placed it in my palm. I looked at my name printed across the front. Wilma Langford. Then I looked at my daughter. "Yes," I said. "I reapplied." Heather's expression changed. Not relief, not happiness, anger. "After everything I told you." That was the moment something inside me finally hardened. Not because Heather was upset, because she believed I had disobeyed her. I opened the envelope while she watched. The first page contained the formal approval. Heather saw the word before I said anything. Approved. Her face went still. I looked directly at her. "They accepted me." Heather didn't congratulate me. Instead, she whispered, "You went behind my back." I folded the letter slowly. Behind her back. My application. My future. My life. And somehow she believed I had needed her permission. I placed the approval letter on the kitchen table. Then I walked upstairs. When I came back down, I was carrying the folder I'd hidden from her. Inside were copies of every withdrawn application, every changed contact detail, every communication sent in my name. Heather stared at this folder. "What is that?" I sat across from her and opened it. For weeks I had been preparing for this conversation without knowing when it would happen. Now it had arrived. I placed the first document between us, then the second, then the third. Heather's face slowly lost its color. "You want to know why I went behind your back?" I asked. She said nothing. I placed the withdrawal email on top. Heather didn't sit down. For several seconds she remained standing across from me, staring at the papers spread over the kitchen table. I recognized the moment she understood what she was looking at. The housing withdrawal, the contact changes, the property tax file, the energy assistance record, her own email address printed where mine should have been. "Sit down, Heather." "Mom, I can explain." "Then sit down and explain." She pulled out the chair across from me. I had imagined this confrontation many times. In some versions I screamed. In others, Heather immediately confessed and apologized. Reality was quieter. I picked up the property tax record. "You told me I didn't qualify." Heather looked at this paper. "I don't remember exactly what I said." "I do." "Mom, that was months ago." "The office says I qualified for preliminary review. Then someone withdrew the application." Heather folded her arms. "Those programs are complicated." "I reapplied." Her eyes lifted. "I was approved." She said nothing. I placed the energy assistance record beside it. "You told me I missed the deadline." "I thought you had." "I hadn't." "Fine, then I was mistaken." "I reapplied for that too." Heather exhaled sharply. "Congratulations." There was no warmth in the word. I reached for the housing paperwork. "This one wasn't a mistake." Her expression changed. "Someone sent an email in my name. I was helping you." "Did you send it?" "Mom." "Did you send that email?" Heather stood. "I don't like being interrogated." "Sit down." She stared at me. I'd rarely spoken to my daughter that way. Slowly she sat again. I pushed the printed email across the table. "Did you write this?" Heather glanced at it. "I handled some communications." "That's not what I asked." "I was trying to keep things organized." "Did you write it?" Silence. My heart was pounding. "Look at me." Heather finally did. "Yes." The word was barely audible. For weeks I'd suspected it. I had records, I had dates, I had evidence. Still hearing my daughter admit it felt like being struck. "You wrote an email pretending to be me." "I didn't pretend to be you." "It's written in first person." "Because I was responding for you." "Without asking me." "You were overwhelmed." "I was grieving." "Exactly." I stared at her. "Those aren't the same thing." Heather rubbed her forehead. "Mom, after Dad died, you could barely get through breakfast without crying. And that gave you the right to decide where I would live." "No." "Then why did you decline the housing application?" "Because you didn't need it." I actually laughed, not because anything was funny. "You decided that you have a house." That wasn't the question. "What question?" "The question was whether I wanted another option." Heather shook her head. "You weren't thinking clearly." "How long—" "What?" "How long after your father died was I no longer allowed to make decisions?" "Don't do that." 3 months, 6 a year. "I never said you weren't allowed." "You didn't have to. You made them for me." Heather's eyes filled with tears. For one dangerous second, the mother in me wanted to stop. I had spent my whole life responding to my daughter's tears. But then I looked at the withdrawal email. I continued. "Why did you change the contact email?" "So I wouldn't miss anything. So I wouldn't see anything." "That's not fair." "Then tell me what is fair." Heather pushed her chair back. "I was working full-time dealing with Jason's problems, checking on you constantly, bringing groceries, paying bills with you, handling insurance. Do you have any idea how much pressure I was under?" There it was, not an apology, a list of reasons I should be grateful. "I appreciated your help." "Did you?" "Yes, until your help became control." Heather flinched. I was protecting you. From tax relief. She looked away. From help with heating costs. No answer. From a benefit connected to your father. That wasn't going to amount to much. You didn't know that. It didn't seem worth putting you through more paperwork. You keep talking as though paperwork is something being done to me. You hated dealing with it after Dad died. So you lied. I simplified things. I stared at her. You told me people had rejected me when they hadn't. Heather's jaw tightened. I made decisions based on what I thought was best. For whom? For you. Then why did every decision reduce my choices? She opened her mouth, then stopped. I leaned forward. If you were protecting me, Heather, why didn't you tell me what you were doing? Silence. If it was right, why did it have to be secret? Her eyes dropped. That was the first moment I saw shame. But it disappeared quickly. You don't understand what could have happened if you'd moved. I became very still. What could have happened? You could have made a decision you regretted. Such as selling this house. There it was. The house. Finally. You were worried I'd sell. Dad spent his life paying for this place. So did I. I know. No, I don't think you do. Heather stood again and walked toward the window. This house matters. To whom? To all of us. It belongs to me. I know that. Do you? She turned. Why are you acting like I'm trying to steal your house? I haven't said that. You don't have to. Then explain why my moving frightened you enough to cancel an application without telling me. Heather looked exhausted now, not angry, cornered. Because once you start making decisions like that, everything changes. What changes? The house could be sold, the money could disappear into rent or fees. You could end up regretting it. The money could disappear. You know what I mean. I don't. She closed her eyes. Mom, I was thinking about the family. I felt a chill. The family. Yes. Which family, Heather? She stared at me. I waited. She didn't answer. I picked up the authorization form. Did you sign this? Her eyes moved toward the signature. I don't remember. That's my name. You signed a lot of forms after Dad died. I know. You gave me permission to help. Help, not choose. I thought it covered correspondence. Correspondence is not consent. Heather shook her head. You sound like you've been talking to someone. I've been talking to myself. That seemed to surprise her. For the first time in a long while. Heather grabbed her purse. I can't do this tonight. We're not finished. I am. She walked toward the door. I followed her into the hallway. Did Jason know? She stopped. Know what? That you were stopping my applications. No. The answer came quickly. I believed that part. Does Jason know you've been counting on this house? Heather turned slowly. I don't know what you're talking about. I heard you once. Her face changed. Mom's house will eventually solve this. Heather went pale. You were listening to us. I walked into my own pantry. You misunderstood. Then help me understand. She tightened her grip on her purse. Jason's investment went bad. I know. We've been under pressure. I know that too. We weren't planning to take anything from you. I didn't say you were. Then stop looking at me like that. Like what? Like I'm some kind of monster. My anger disappeared for a moment. You're my daughter. That's why this hurts. Heather looked down. I continued more quietly. If a stranger had done this, I'd know exactly what to call it. But you're my child. I remember holding you when you had nightmares. I remember your first day of school. I remember sitting beside you the night Jason proposed. My voice broke. And now I'm standing here wondering when you stopped seeing me as your mother and started seeing me as a problem to manage. Tears rolled down Heather's cheeks. I never stopped loving you. I believe you. She looked surprised. But love doesn't give you ownership. I wasn't trying to own you. Then why did you answer for me? Heather wiped her face. I thought I was protecting what Dad left us. Us. That one word told me more than everything else. I opened the front door. Heather stared at me. Go home. Mom? Not tonight. She stepped onto the porch. Before I closed the door, she turned back. You don't understand the whole situation. Then someday you'll explain it. I looked directly at her. But don't ever answer another piece of my mail. Heather left. I locked the door. Then I returned to the kitchen and sat beside the papers. My daughter had finally admitted she had answered for me. But she still hadn't admitted the one thing I now needed to hear. Why she believed Frank's house belonged to us before I was even gone. And I knew that when the rest of the truth came out, our argument would no longer be about mail. It would be about what my daughter believed she was entitled to inherit from a woman who was still alive. Then sit down. Because this time my daughter wasn't going to explain my paperwork to me. I was going to explain it to her. Heather didn't call me the next day, or the day after that. For most mothers, 2 days of silence from an adult daughter wouldn't mean much. For Heather and me, it felt enormous. Before all this, we spoke almost every day. Sometimes she called because she needed something. Sometimes I did. Sometimes we talked for 10 minutes about absolutely nothing. Now my phone sat silent on the kitchen counter. I told myself I was relieved. I wasn't. I was angry with Heather, but I still missed her. That's the cruel thing about betrayal inside a family. The person who hurts you doesn't stop being the person you love. On the third afternoon, someone knocked. I looked through the window. Heather. I opened the door but didn't step aside immediately. Can I come in? Are you ready to tell me the truth? Her face tightened. Yes. I let her inside. She walked toward the kitchen automatically, then stopped when she saw the papers still stacked on the table. I had organized everything into folders. My applications, the withdrawals, the housing approval, the house documents. Heather stared at them. You've really been busy. I had to be. She sat down. I remained standing. Jason knows we argued, she said. Does he know why? Some of it? Does he know you answered my mail? Heather looked away. No. Why not? Because I'm ashamed. It was the first time she'd used that word. I sat across from her. Then tell me what you meant when you said you were protecting what your father left us. Heather inhaled slowly. Dad always said this house was important. Your father said financial security was important. He loved this house. So did I. He wanted it to stay in the family. I studied her. Did he tell you that? Heather hesitated. Not exactly. Then don't use your father to say something he never said. Her eyes flashed. You know what he would have wanted. No, I know what he did want. He wanted me taken care of. That's what I'm trying to do. By refusing things in my name. Can we stop going in circles? Then stop giving me the same excuse. Heather pressed her palms against the table. If you move into that senior community, what happens to the house? That's my decision. You'll sell it. I might. And then what? I'll decide what to do with the money. She laughed bitterly. Exactly. I felt my chest tighten. What does that mean? It means once you sell, that money starts disappearing. Into what? Rent, fees, whatever else. My living expenses. You already have somewhere to live. Somewhere you have decided I must live. I didn't say must. You didn't need to. You canceled my application. Heather stood. I made one bad decision. Several. Fine, several. She walked toward the sink, then turned. You want the truth? Jason and I are in trouble. I already know that. No. You know the investment went badly. You don't know how badly. I waited. Heather folded her arms across herself. When one of Jason's partners pulled out, Jason covered more than he should have. They borrowed, then costs went up. They expected to sell quickly, but the market changed. How much do you owe? I'm not giving you a number. Then don't. We're managing it. Are you? She looked at me. We might have to sell our house. There it was. The fear beneath everything. For 1 second I felt sympathy. Then I remembered my applications. What does that have to do with my house? Heather looked down. Nothing right now. Right now. She closed her eyes. Mom, you're my only parent. I'm your only child. I know our family tree. Eventually, this house was going to come to me. I stared at her. There it was. Not hidden anymore. Not wrapped in concern. Inheritance. Eventually. Heather nodded. That's what your will says. My will says what happens after I die. I know. Do you? Stop doing that. No. Because you keep talking about this house as though I'm temporarily occupying something that already belongs to you. I don't think that. You just said it was going to come to you. Someday. Someday isn't today. Heather's eyes filled with tears. I know that. Then why did my decision to move scare you? She didn't answer. I understood. If I sold the house, I said slowly, there might be less left. Heather remained silent. If I used the money for rent, medical care, travel, or anything else, there might be less for you. That's not how I thought about it. Then tell me how you thought about it. I thought Dad worked his entire life to build something. So did I. And it seemed wrong to watch it disappear. Something inside me snapped. Disappear. Heather flinched. If I use the money Frank and I earned to take care of myself, that's disappearing. That's not what I meant. Then choose better words. She started crying. Mom, please. No. I want to understand. If I live another 20 years and spend every dollar Frank and I saved because I need it to live safely and comfortably, have I wasted your inheritance? I never said wasted. You called it disappearing. I was scared. So you made me smaller to make yourself safer. Heather stared at me. That sentence landed between us. I continued. You decided I shouldn't receive tax relief. I thought keeping the house uncomplicated was better. You stopped energy assistance. I was handling too many things. You discouraged me from Frank's benefit. I didn't think it would matter. And you canceled housing because if I moved, I might sell. Heather finally whispered, yes. The word hurt more than I expected. I nodded slowly. Thank you. For what? For finally telling me. Heather covered her face. I didn't start out planning this. I believed her. That was almost worse. I know. After Dad died, you needed help. I started handling things. Then Jason's project collapsed. Bills started coming. We were scared. And you looked at my house. I looked at what Dad had built. What we built, she nodded. What you both built. And somewhere along the way you started counting it. Heather didn't answer. Didn't you? She wiped her face. Yes. There was the truth. Ugly and small and devastating. My daughter had begun calculating her inheritance while I was still cooking dinner in the kitchen she expected to inherit. Did Jason tell you to do this? No. Did he know you were stopping my applications? No. Did he expect me to give you the house? No. He told me once we couldn't plan around money that wasn't ours. That surprised me. So this was you? Heather nodded. I convinced myself I was protecting the family. I looked at her. No, sweetheart. The old endearment slipped out naturally. Heather's face crumpled. You were protecting a future you wanted. She cried quietly. I wanted to go around the table and hold her. Every instinct I had as a mother told me to. But motherhood had been the reason I'd excused too much already. So I stayed seated. After several minutes, Heather asked, Are you going to sell? I haven't decided. If you move into that apartment? I haven't decided. Mom, please don't make a decision because you're angry. I stared at her. This is exactly what you still don't understand. What? You think every decision I make that you dislike must come from anger, confusion, grief, or somebody influencing me? I didn't mean. I can make a decision simply because I want it. Heather looked down. I stood and walked to the window. Outside the maple tree, Frank complained about every fall moved gently in the wind. Your father didn't spend 40 years working, so you could inherit a building, I said. He worked so we could have security. Heather said nothing. If selling this house someday gives me security, then selling it honors what he worked for. But the memories. Come with me. I turned toward her. Frank isn't in the deed. He isn't in the bricks. He isn't in the kitchen cabinets. My voice softened. He's in me. Heather began crying again. This time I did walk over. I touched her shoulder. but I didn't take back anything I'd said. I love you, I told her. I love you too. Then understand something. She looked up. My life is not your inheritance. Heather closed her eyes. And whatever I leave you someday will be a gift, not a debt I owe you. She nodded. I stepped away. There was still one problem left, the authorization form, the signature that might or might not have been mine, the communications sent without my consent. Heather had admitted enough for me to understand the betrayal, but understanding it didn't protect me from it happening again. After she left, I called Carol. Then I made another call. This one was to a local legal aid organization. I wasn't calling because I wanted my daughter punished. I was calling because love had already blurred too many boundaries. This time I needed someone who could tell me exactly where helping ended and authority began, and what I needed to do to make sure nobody, not even my own daughter, could ever cross that line again. And for the first time, I was considering selling it, not because Heather wanted me to keep it, or because I wanted to punish her by letting it go. I was considering what I wanted. That evening, I walked through every room. I touched the banister Frank had refinished. I stood beside the fireplace where we'd taken Christmas photographs. I sat in our bedroom and cried. Then I understood something. Keeping the house wouldn't bring Frank back. Selling it wouldn't erase him. And whatever decision I made, it would be mine. The next morning I called a real estate agent. Not Heather, not Carol, not Michael. I made the call myself, because I was finally ready to find out what my house was worth. And once I knew, I intended to decide what the rest of my life was worth too. The real estate agent arrived on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a leather folder and wearing sensible shoes. Her name was Susan Mitchell, and she had been selling homes in our area for almost 20 years. I had chosen her because she didn't know Heather or Jason. That mattered to me. For once I wanted an opinion about my house that had nothing to do with family. Susan walked slowly through every room making notes. She measured spaces, examined the windows, asked when the roof had been replaced, and complimented the hardwood floors Frank had refinished himself. When we reached the kitchen, she ran her hand over one of the cabinet doors. These are beautiful. My husband made them. Really, everyone. For a moment, pride pushed aside everything else. Frank had spent months building those cabinets. I could still picture him standing in the garage covered in sawdust, insisting he didn't need help. Susan must have noticed my expression. A lot of memories here. 35 years worth. That makes selling harder. Does it? Sometimes. She closed her folder. But memories don't disappear at closing. I looked at her. She had no idea how much I needed to hear that. We sat at the kitchen table. Susan showed me recent comparable sales. I'd already done some research, but seeing the numbers professionally organized made everything real. My house was worth considerably more than Frank and I had ever paid for it. After paying off the small remaining mortgage and accounting for selling expenses, I would still have enough to strengthen my retirement significantly. I could move into the senior apartment. I could cover future medical expenses. I could travel a little if I wanted. Most importantly, I would have options. I don't need an answer today, Susan said. I looked around the kitchen. I think I already know. She waited. I want to sell. Saying it aloud hurt. But underneath the hurt was relief. Over the following weeks, the other pieces of my life began falling into place. The property tax relief was officially finalized. The energy assistance program confirmed my eligibility. Then came the review connected to Frank. The final amount wasn't enormous, but it was real. It was something I had been entitled to pursue. Something Heather had dismissed before anyone with actual authority had evaluated it. I placed the letter in the folder labeled Frank. Then I whispered, "We got it." I don't know why I said we. Maybe because Frank had earned part of what that letter represented. Maybe because some victories still felt like they belonged to both of us. The senior housing approval was finalized too. Denise called personally. "Everything is complete on our side, Mrs. Langford. So the apartment is mine if I want it. If you accept it, yes." I looked through the window at the maple tree. "I accept." The word came without hesitation. That afternoon I signed the necessary documents. The woman who had supposedly declined everything was suddenly saying yes. Yes to assistance. Yes to a benefit. Yes to a new home. Yes to herself. Susan listed my house shortly afterward. Heather found out 3 days later. I didn't tell her. I wasn't hiding it. I simply no longer believed I needed to report every decision before making it. She saw the for sale sign. I was watering flowers near the porch when her car stopped abruptly at the curb. Heather got out before she'd fully shut off the engine. "Mom?" I put down the watering can. She pointed toward the sign. "What is that?" "You know what it is." "You're selling?" "Yes." "Without telling me." "I just told you." "You know what I mean." I wiped my hands on my pants. "I didn't need permission." "I didn't say permission." "You keep using different words for the same thing." Heather walked toward me. "Can we talk inside?" I considered saying no. Then I opened the door. She followed me into the kitchen. For several seconds she stared around the room as if the house had already disappeared. "You really accepted that apartment?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I liked it." "You've barely spent time there." "I toured it twice." Heather blinked. "You did?" "Yes." "When?" "While I was making my decision." Her face fell. She was beginning to understand how much of my life now existed outside her knowledge. "Mom, this is happening so fast." "No. You just weren't involved in the process." She sat down. "What if you regret it?" "Then I'll live with my decision." "You could keep the house." "I could." "You don't need to sell." "I want to." Heather looked toward the cabinets. "Dad made those." "I know. The marks on the pantry door are still there from when you measured me growing up." "I know." "How can you just let strangers have this?" That hurt, because I had asked myself the same question. I sat across from her. "I'm not selling my memories." "It feels like you are." "To you." "To both of us." "No, Heather. Don't decide what this feels like for me." She looked down. "I'm trying." "I know." That was true. Since our confrontation, Heather had stopped accessing my accounts. She no longer collected my mail. She called less often, perhaps, because she no longer knew what kind of relationship we were supposed to have. But the house was the wound she hadn't accepted. After a long silence, she said, "Jason and I may have to sell ours." "I'm sorry. We're trying to restructure some things." "I hope you can." She looked at me. "If we lose it." I waited. Heather couldn't finish. And then I understood why she had come. Not only because of memories. Not only because of Frank. Some part of her still saw my house as a possible rescue. "Are you asking me for money?" Her face reddened. "No." "Then what are you asking?" "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She stood. "I just don't understand why you need to sell right now." "Because I'm moving." "You could rent it." "I don't want to become a landlord." "You could leave it empty for a while." "Why?" "Until things settle down." "For whom?" Heather turned toward the window. There was my answer. I stood too. "You're still doing it." "Doing what?" "Planning my property around your problems." "That's not fair." "Then tell me I'm wrong." She didn't. I walked closer. "Your father and I bought this house when you were 7. Heather looked at me. "We worked overtime. We skipped vacations. We refinanced once when things were tight. We repaired what we could ourselves." "I know." "No, listen." She became quiet. "We didn't do all that so one day you could use this house to solve a bad investment." Tears appeared in her eyes. "I never asked you to pay our debt." "You didn't have to. You were trying to preserve the asset." Heather flinched. "I was scared." "I know. Jason could lose everything." "Then Jason and you will make decisions about what belongs to Jason and you." Her lips trembled. "And I'll make decisions about what belongs to me." She wiped her face. "What if there's nothing left someday?" I knew what she meant. Inheritance. There it was again. This time I didn't feel angry, only sad. I took her hand. "Heather, look at me." She did. You were waiting to inherit my life before I was finished living it. Her face collapsed. Mom, I don't think you meant to become that person. I didn't. I believe you. That surprised her. But intentions don't erase consequences. She began crying. I've been horrible. You've been afraid. That's not an excuse. No. For the first time, she was the one who said it. Not an excuse. Something shifted between us. I squeezed her hand. I may live 5 more years. I may live 25. Don't say that. It's reality. Heather cried harder. And while I'm here, I intend to live. She nodded. If I need my savings, I'll use them. If I want to travel, I may travel. If I need care someday, I'll pay for care. I understand. Whatever remains after I'm gone is what you inherit. She closed her eyes. Not what you preserve by making me afraid to spend it. I'm sorry. This time I believed she understood what she was apologizing for, but understanding didn't change my decision. The house stayed listed. 2 weeks later, Susan called. We have an offer. My stomach flipped. Good, very good. A young couple had offered close to asking price. They had 2 children. When Susan told me that, I walked upstairs and stood in Heather's old bedroom. For years I had feared that selling meant ending the story of this house. Now I saw it differently. Maybe the story wasn't ending. Maybe another family was simply getting their turn. I accepted the offer. That evening I stood alone in the kitchen. The sunset came through the window and lit Frank's cabinets. I touched one gently. I hope you're okay with this, I whispered. In my mind I could almost hear him. Wilma, you're overthinking it. I laughed through my tears. The house had done exactly what Frank and I had wanted. It had sheltered us. It had raised our daughter. It had given us security. And now, one final time, it was going to take care of me. I wasn't losing Frank's legacy. I was finally using it for the person he had intended it to protect. His wife. Me. The morning I left the house, I woke before sunrise. For the last time, I opened my eyes in the bedroom Frank and I had shared for more than 3 decades. Most of the furniture was already gone. The walls looked strangely large without our photographs. My dresser had been moved the day before, and the only things beside me were an overnight bag, my purse, and the little wooden box where I kept Frank's wedding ring. I lay there listening. No moving trucks, no traffic yet, just the quiet breathing of an old house. For 35 years, I had known every sound it made. The creak outside Heather's old bedroom, the click in the heating vent, the kitchen window that rattled whenever the wind came from the west. I thought leaving would feel like betrayal. Instead, it felt like saying goodbye to someone I loved. There was sadness, but there was gratitude too. I carried my suitcase downstairs. Before leaving, I walked through every room one last time. In the kitchen, I touched the cabinets Frank had built. Thank you, I whispered. I wasn't sure whether I was speaking to the house or to him, maybe both. Then I locked the door and drove away. My new apartment was smaller than the house by almost half, and I loved it. There was one bedroom, a bright living room, a compact kitchen, and windows overlooking a courtyard with 2 maple trees. Apparently, I couldn't escape maple trees. Carol helped me unpack. She stood in the center of the living room holding one of Frank's old lamps. Where does this go? Beside the chair. Which chair? My chair. Carol grinned. Listen to you. What? Your chair, your apartment, your decision. I threw a dish towel at her. But I understood what she meant. For months, nearly every sentence about my future had contained someone else's opinion. Heather thinks. Heather says. Heather recommends. Now I was deciding where a lamp went, and somehow even that felt important. I chose the furniture I wanted to keep. I donated things I'd held onto out of habit. I bought new curtains. Yellow. Frank would have hated them. That made me laugh every morning for a week. I moved my banking statements entirely to my own secure email. I kept my P.O. box for sensitive correspondence. I reviewed my retirement accounts. With Michael's guidance, I also updated my estate documents so they reflected my current wishes and protected my independence. I did not disinherit Heather. That surprised Carol. You sure Yes. After everything. She's still my daughter. Carol nodded. But being my daughter doesn't give her access to my money while I'm alive. That was the difference I hadn't understood before. Love and access were not the same thing. Forgiveness and permission were not the same thing. Family and ownership were not the same thing. The proceeds from the house sale went into accounts structured around my retirement and future needs. I did not pay Jason's debts. I did not rescue Heather. That decision was harder than selling the house. A few weeks after I moved, Heather called. Jason and I are probably going to list our house. I'm sorry. We may have to downsize. You'll figure it out. There was a pause. The old version of me would have immediately asked how much they needed. I would have offered something before Heather even requested it. Instead, I waited. Heather finally said, I know what you're thinking. What am I thinking? That I'm calling because I want money. Are you? No. Then I'm not thinking it. Another pause. I'm trying not to do that anymore. Do what? Look at you and see a solution. I closed my eyes. That sentence mattered more than she probably realized. Thank you for saying that. We'll handle our own mess. I hope you do. Mom. Yes. Are you happy there? I looked around my little living room. The yellow curtains moved gently near the window. A puzzle Carol and I had started sat unfinished on the table. A flyer for a community dinner was pinned to my refrigerator. Yes. Heather was quiet. Then she said, Good. That was all. We didn't suddenly become close again. Healing wasn't that neat. For several weeks, Heather and I spoke only occasionally. She no longer stopped by unannounced. She didn't ask about my accounts. She didn't ask what I'd done with the house money. And I didn't ask for daily updates about Jason's debt. We were learning something neither of us had practiced before. Distance without abandonment. I started attending activities in the community. The first was a book club. I almost didn't go. I had never been good at walking into rooms where everyone already seemed to know one another. But Carol refused to let me hide. You didn't fight this hard for independence so you could sit alone watching game shows. So I went. I met a retired teacher named Linda who talked too much. A former nurse named Evelyn who talked almost not at all. And a woman named Margaret who had moved there after selling the farmhouse where she'd raised 4 children. One afternoon, Margaret and I sat outside. Do you miss it? I asked. The farm. I nodded. Every day. Do you regret selling? Not once. I laughed. How does that work? She smiled. Missing something and needing it back aren't the same thing. I thought about Frank. My house. Even the old relationship I'd had with Heather. Maybe that was true about people too. You could miss what something had been without wanting to return to it unchanged. Weeks passed. My apartment gradually stopped feeling new. I learned which grocery store shuttle was least crowded. I learned that Linda always cheated slightly at cards. I learned that Tuesday morning coffee in the community room was mostly an excuse for everyone to gossip. I even joined a volunteer group that assembled care packages for a nearby women's shelter. For the first time since Frank died, I wasn't simply surviving the absence of my old life. I was building another one. Still, there were nights when loneliness arrived unexpectedly. Sometimes I'd reach for my phone to call Heather, then stop. Not because I wanted to punish her, because I wasn't sure whether I missed my daughter or the version of our relationship where I never questioned her. There was a difference. Carol noticed. Give it time. I hate that advice. That's because it's usually correct. One evening, I found an old photograph while unpacking the last box. Heather was maybe 9. She sat on Frank's shoulders at a county fair holding cotton candy bigger than her head. I stared at it for a long time. I loved that little girl. I loved the woman she'd become too, even after everything. But I had finally learned that loving someone did not require surrendering yourself to them. I placed the photograph on a shelf. Then I went to bed. 3 days later, I checked my P.O. box. There were 2 advertisements, a statement, and 1 handwritten envelope. I recognized the handwriting immediately. Heather. For several seconds, I simply held it. Months earlier, my mailbox had been the place where my choices disappeared. Letters had arrived for me and somehow become decisions made by someone else. Now I was standing alone in the post office with a letter from the very person who had once answered my mail. And nobody had opened it. Nobody had decided whether I should read it. Nobody had filtered what it meant. The envelope belonged to me. The choice belonged to me. I could open it. I could take it home. I could throw it away. That freedom was so simple that 6 months earlier, I wouldn't have understood why it mattered. I slipped the envelope into my purse. I didn't open it in the car. I drove home, made myself a cup of coffee, sat beside my ridiculous yellow curtains. Then I placed Heather's letter on the table. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The first line was only 5 words. Mom, I owe you the truth. I stopped reading. Not because I was afraid of what came next, because for the first time since all of this began, Heather wasn't answering for me. She was finally answering for herself. And now I had to decide whether I was ready to hear her. I read Heather's first sentence 3 times. Mom, I owe you the truth. Then I put the letter down. For nearly 10 minutes I sat beside my yellow curtains and stared out at the courtyard. A few months earlier, I would have torn through the pages immediately. I would have needed to know what Heather was thinking, what she wanted, whether she was angry with me. But something had changed. I no longer felt responsible for fixing every uncomfortable feeling between us. When I was ready, I picked up the letter again. Heather had written 4 pages. Her handwriting became less steady as the letter continued. She began with Frank. After Dad died, I really did think I was helping you. I stopped. That part I believed. Heather wrote about the funeral, the insurance calls, the stacks of paperwork, and the nights when I couldn't sleep. She remembered sitting beside me while I cried over forms that required me to mark Frank as deceased. She said helping had made her feel useful. Then gradually usefulness became something else. I got used to being the person who knew what was best. That sentence hurt because it was so simple. There was no villainous plan, no single morning when my daughter woke up and decided to take control of my life. It happened gradually. She helped. I depended. She decided more. I questioned less. Then Jason's investment began collapsing. Heather wrote that they had hidden the seriousness of their financial problems because they were embarrassed. Their savings were disappearing. Jason was getting calls from lenders and contractors. They started talking about selling their home, and Heather became afraid. That's when I started thinking about your house differently. I stopped again. At least she wasn't calling it our house anymore. Your house. 2 words. But they mattered. Heather admitted that she had begun mentally counting what she might inherit someday. She hated herself for writing it, she said, but pretending otherwise would only continue the lie. When I thought you might move, I imagined you selling the house. Then I imagined the money being spent on rent, care, travel, or whatever came next. Instead of thinking, Mom earned that security, I thought, there goes the one thing that could save us someday. Tears blurred the page. Heather continued. I told myself I was protecting Dad's legacy. The truth is, I was protecting a future I had already started treating as mine. I put the letter against my chest. For months, that was what I had needed her to understand. Not simply that she'd answered my mail, not simply that she'd withdrawn applications, but that somewhere along the way, she had forgotten one basic fact. I was still alive. Heather wrote that the first application she'd interfered with hadn't felt serious. She believed the program wouldn't matter much. The next decision became easier, then another. By the time the senior housing application arrived, she had convinced herself that keeping me in my house was good for everyone. She wrote, I crossed the line between helping you and controlling you, and I kept moving the line every time I needed to feel less guilty. I cried then. Not because the letter erased what happened. It didn't. But Heather was finally naming it without asking me to make it smaller. Near the end, she wrote about the day she saw the for sale sign. She admitted she'd been furious. Then she went home and told Jason everything. Everything. The applications, the mail, the housing withdrawal, her fear about the inheritance. Jason had been horrified. According to Heather, he told her something she would never forget. Your mother's house was never our backup plan. I remembered Heather telling me Jason hadn't known. Now I believed her even more. She wrote that she and Jason had decided to sell their own house and move somewhere smaller. They would deal with their debt themselves. Then came the part that mattered most. I'm not asking you to trust me again because I wrote an apology. I know trust doesn't work that way. I'm asking whether someday you might let me earn a different relationship with you. I lowered the letter. A different relationship. Not the old one. That was important. Because I didn't want the old relationship back. The old relationship had contained love, but it had also contained habits that made what happened possible. I had confused dependence with closeness. Heather had confused involvement with authority. Going backward wouldn't heal us. We needed something new. I waited 2 days before answering. Then I sat at my little dining table with stationery and wrote, "Dear Heather, I love you." That has never been the question. I told her I appreciated her honesty. I told her I believed she had originally intended to help. But good intentions couldn't erase what came later. Then I wrote the boundaries clearly. My mail would remain private. My accounts would remain under my control. She would not communicate with government offices, financial institutions, doctors, or housing representatives on my behalf unless I specifically asked her to. She would not make decisions about where I lived. She would not plan around my money. And if I asked for advice would remain advice, not permission. I stared at the next sentence for a long time before writing it. I forgive you, but forgiveness is not the same as returning things to the way they were. That was perhaps the hardest lesson I'd learned. Forgiveness didn't require amnesia. It didn't require handing back the key to the same door someone had misused. Sometimes forgiveness meant opening a different door, carefully. I mailed the letter myself. A week later, Heather called. "Can I visit?" I appreciated that she asked. "Yes." "What day works for you?" I smiled. That was new too. We chose Saturday. When Heather arrived, she stood outside my apartment holding a small plant. Peace offering, a housewarming gift. Several months late. I know. I led her inside. She looked around. Her eyes stopped at the yellow curtains. Dad would hate those. I laughed. He absolutely would. For the first time in months, we laughed together without anything hiding beneath it. I made Heather sat at my table. Neither of us pretended everything was fixed. She told me she and Jason had listed their house. They had found a smaller place they could afford. "We're going to lose money," she said. "I'm sorry. It's our problem." I looked at her. She noticed. "I'm learning." Good. Then Heather asked about my apartment. Not whether I regretted moving. Not whether I planned to sell anything else. She asked if I liked my neighbors. I told her about Linda cheating at cards. Heather laughed. We talked for nearly 2 hours. When she got up to leave, she hesitated. "Can I hug you?" Another question. Another choice returned to me. Yes. I held my daughter. Not the way I had after Frank died, when both of us were terrified and clinging to whatever remained. This was different. I wasn't holding Heather because I needed her to manage my life. She wasn't holding me because she needed to protect her future. We were simply a mother and daughter trying again. After she left, I walked to the window. For a moment, I thought about everything that had happened. A second notice, a phone call, 4 applications, a P.O. box key, an apartment, a sold house, such ordinary things. But together they had taught me something extraordinary. When I first reapplied, I thought I was fighting for benefits. I wasn't. I was applying again for my own future, for my right to choose, for the part of myself I had slowly surrendered because accepting help had been easier than admitting how lost I felt after Frank died. Heather had answered for me long enough. From that day forward, whenever life asked me a question, I made sure the answer came from me. Ketuk Fan 15. I used to think independence meant never needing anyone. At 67. I learned that isn't true. We all need people. We need daughters, friends, neighbors, professionals, and sometimes strangers, who patiently explain a form we don't understand. The danger begins when help quietly becomes control. Heather didn't take my independence from me in one dramatic moment. I gave away little pieces because I trusted her, because I was grieving, and because it felt easier to let someone else handle things. And Heather crossed boundaries because fear convinced her she had the right. But love without respect can become something painful. Being someone's mother doesn't mean your life becomes their property when you reach a certain age. Your savings are still yours. Your home is still yours. Your mail is still yours. Your decisions are still yours. If you are 60, 70, 80, or beyond, you are not simply waiting to become someone's inheritance. You are still living. And the things you worked for are there first to support your dignity, safety, happiness, and choices. I also learned something about forgiveness. Forgiving Heather did not mean giving her my passwords again. It didn't mean pretending she had done nothing wrong. It meant I stopped carrying anger while keeping the boundaries that protected me. Sometimes a boundary isn't a wall. Sometimes it's the doorway through which a healthier relationship can finally enter. If this were your daughter, could you forgive her after discovering she had secretly declined opportunities in your name? Or would that betrayal change the relationship forever? Tell me what you would have done in the comments. I truly want to hear your perspective, especially if you've ever had to set a difficult boundary with someone you love. And if stories about family, betrayal, dignity, justice, second chances, and finding your voice later in life mean something to you, subscribe and stay with me. Because sometimes starting over doesn't mean losing everything. Sometimes it means